Amara, I need to talk to you about something. Something I think God has been speaking to me about.
Okay, tell me. You know I'm always in your corner.
I believe God is leading me towards Sister Grace. And I need your help.
Help you? How? How am I supposed to do that? Welcome to Labari Haven, home of African stories that stay with you.
You have seen a man who says he needs help finding love, and a woman whose face is already answering a question he hasn't asked yet. If you've seen part 1, you already know what her silence was hiding. What you haven't seen yet are the small, ordinary moments where a devoted heart quietly started keeping scores. If you think you know, please share it with us in the comments and stay with me because I promise you, it's more complicated than jealousy. This is part 2 of the series. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to catch up on part 1. Now, let's get into it. There is a particular kind of noticing that does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as ordinary attention, so quiet that the person feeling it can call it anything else before they call it what it is. For Amara, it started small. It started with counting. She began to notice, in a way she never had before, how many times Daniel's eyes found hers across a hole before they found anyone else's. She began to notice that when he was tired, hoarse from 3 services back to back, hers was the water bottle he reached for without asking, because some habit between them had already decided she would have it ready. She began to notice that when a difficult member cornered him after service with a complaint dressed up as a concern, it was her name he said under his breath afterward, not to complain, just to exhale. Amara will know what to do with this. All of it had been happening for years. What was new was that Amara had started keeping a private, unspoken ledger of these moments, filing each one under a heading she had not yet let herself write out in full. One particular Wednesday evening, after a leaders' meeting had emptied and only the stacked chairs remained, as witnesses, Daniel lingered by the door while Amara gathered her things.
You didn't eat today, did you?
I had time for one meeting or one meal, and I chose the meeting.
Eat. I need my right hand functioning.
It was such a small thing. A meat pie on a plastic table, offered the way you'd offer anything to a colleague you respected. But Amara carried that meat pie home like a verse she intended to memorize. She replayed his voice saying, "My right hand," turning the phrase over until it stopped sounding like gratitude and started sounding, in the privacy of her own mind, like something closer to belonging. She did not tell anyone how long she sat with that thought. She barely admitted it to herself. But that night, for the first time, she prayed a prayer she had never prayed before in 8 years of partnering with the vision. Lord, she whispered into her dark room, if this is more than ministry, don't let me miss it. Don't let me be the one who waited faithfully and then walked past the answer because I was too busy serving to see it standing in front of me. It was a small prayer. It felt to her like faith. She did not yet recognize it as the first quiet fork in a road she had walked straight for 8 years. The comments from church members had never really stopped. They had simply changed shape. The way a rumor matures into gossip, into something people say to your face, half joking, fully hopeful. What changed that season was not the comments, it was Amara. Where she once deflected with a scripture and a smile, quick to shut the conversation down before it could take root, she now let the jokes linger a half-second longer before she laughed them off. She still denied it out loud, still said the right things, were just partners in the vision, but her denials had lost their edge. Anyone paying close attention would have noticed that her eyes no longer avoided the subject. They searched it. Tolu noticed. Tolu always noticed. They sat on the same rug in Amara's apartment where so many of their honest conversations had happened over the years, the smell of fried plantain still hanging faintly in the air from dinner, a half-finished bowl of zobo sweating on the small table between them.
You've been different lately. Lighter, or maybe I should say, more hopeful. What's going on with you? Nothing's going on. I'm just content, I think, grateful for how things are. Has Daniel said anything to you? Said anything about what?
Amara's voice came too quickly, too bright, betraying the very thing it was trying to hide. Tolu smiled, slow and knowing, the smile of someone who has watched a friend fall in love from 100 feet away long before the friend admits she's standing at the edge.
You know what I mean, Amara. Don't play with me. He's been different with me lately, Tolu. Softer, more intentional.
Last week, he told the whole leadership team he doesn't know what the ministry would be like without me. And he looked at me the whole time he said it. Not at anyone else. At me. And you think that means something? I think, Amara said carefully, choosing each word like she was laying stepping stones across water. 8 years is a long time for God to be silent about something this important. I think maybe he's been building this the way he built everything else in this ministry.
Slowly, in his own time.
Tolu did not argue with her. She had learned over years of friendship that some hopes cannot be talked out of a person, only witnessed. And so instead of pushing back, she asked one more question, gently, the way you test the depth of water before wading in further.
If he asked you tomorrow, would you say yes? I would have said yes 8 years ago.
Amara's answer came without a single second of hesitation, and that alone told Tolu everything she needed to know about how far this had already gone. Tolu did not plant the hope in Amara that night. It was already there, fully grown, needing only permission to speak itself aloud. But permission, once given, has a way of feeding a thing until it can no longer fit quietly inside a person's chest.
What Tolu could not have known, sitting across from her friend on that familiar rug, was that Amara had already begun something she would not have called scheming, because the word felt too ugly for what she believed herself to be doing. She called it positioning. It sounded gentler. It sounded like faith with its sleeves rolled up. She started arriving 15 minutes earlier to every leaders' meeting, not to work harder than she already did, but to be the first face Daniel saw when he walked in. She began wearing the green dress he had once complimented on more Sundays than the compliment alone could explain. She volunteered for the projects that put her closest to his calendar, his decisions, his unguarded moments between services when his collar was still damp with sweat and his voice hadn't yet found its pulpit polish. None of it looked like pursuit from the outside. It looked to everyone watching exactly like the devotion Amara had always shown. Only Amara knew that somewhere in the last few months, devotion and desire had quietly folded into the same motion so that she could no longer fully separate which one was moving her feet on any given morning. She told herself she was simply making room. She told herself that if God was truly building something between her and Daniel, the least she could do was stop hiding in the background and let herself be seen. She did not ask herself, not seriously, what it meant that faith now required rehearsal, that waiting on God started to look in her hands almost indistinguishable from angling for a man's attention. It was in the middle of this season, oddly enough, that Jude found her after a Sunday service, his youngest child balanced on his hip, his wife trailing a few steps behind with the older one's hand in her own. He was not the guarded young man with his arms crossed like a barricade anymore. He was a father now, settled, sturdy, a living monument to what Amara's obedience had once built out of nothing. "You don't know what you did for my life," he told her, the way he told her almost every time their paths crossed, as though the debt still needed repeating. Amara hugged him, hugged his wife, admired the baby's fat cheeks, and for those few minutes standing in the church courtyard, something in her chest settled back into the shape it used to hold before Daniel's name had started rearranging her prayers. This at least remained uncomplicated. This love had never asked to be paid back, and it never would. She carried that steadiness with her for the rest of the afternoon, and if she noticed the quiet contradiction in it, a heart capable of loving so freely in one direction while quietly keeping score in another, she did not let herself look at it directly. There was too much else demanding her attention. There was, in particular, a new face at the back of the hall she had already decided to go and welcome. Grace arrived at Kingsgate Chapel the way most new faces did, uncertain, hovering near the back, unsure whether she belonged in a room this warm and this loud with people who all seemed to already know each other's names. She was 27, with a voice that made people stop mid-conversation when she hummed absent-mindedly during rehearsal breaks, and a face that hadn't yet learned to guard itself, every emotion crossing it plainly, unfiltered, the way a much younger person's might. She had grown up going to church the way many people do, out of obligation rather than conviction, and it showed in the way she asked questions that assumed nothing, questions that Amara's more seasoned members had long since stopped asking. Amara found her the way she found everyone. She noticed her sitting alone during a fellowship breakfast, plate barely touched, eyes scanning the room like she was calculating an exit.
First time here?
Amara asked, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting for an invitation, the same way she'd slid on a stairwell floor beside a crying stranger years ago. Is it that obvious? Grace laughed, a little embarrassed.
Only because everyone who's new sits exactly where you're sitting. Close enough to the door to leave, far enough from anyone to have to talk.
Grace's laugh this time was fuller, more relieved. My co-worker invited me. I said yes because she wouldn't stop asking. I don't really know anything about, well, any of this.
Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Amara said, and meant it completely, the way she'd meant it with Jude years before him, and with dozens of names since him whose faces she still remembered on the night she counted her life's true harvest.
What followed over the coming weeks was Amara doing what Amara had always done best. She sat with Grace over scripture, patient with every question, never once making her feel small for not knowing what others took for granted. She called to check on her after a hard week at work. She invited her to sit beside her during service until Grace no longer needed the invitation, until she started arriving early enough to save the seat herself. Grace grew the way soil grows things when someone finally tends it properly. And Amara watched that growth with the same fierce, uncomplicated joy she had always felt watching lives change. This part of her, at least, had not shifted. Her love for the work of discipleship remained exactly as pure as it had been under the mango tree 8 years earlier. It was Amara who first noticed the voice. During a rehearsal one evening, the choir director, short-staffed and frazzled, Grace had quietly hummed a harmony under her breath while waiting her turn, unaware anyone was listening. Amara, standing nearby with a stack of programs in her arms, stopped completely still. "Say that again," Amara said. "Say what?" Grace looked around confused. "What you were just humming, do it again." Grace, self-conscious now, hummed the line again, softer this time, almost apologetic. Amara turned to the choir director without hesitation. She needs to be up there with the rest of them, today, not next month, today. It was Amara's endorsement, more than anyone else's, that opened that door. And when Grace stood at the microphone for the first time 3 weeks later, voice trembling before it settled into something rich and startling, it was Amara standing at the back of the hall, arms folded, eyes wet, feeling something close to pride swell in her chest. She did not yet understand that she was building the very thing that would one day undo her. Grace's growth, once it began, did not slow. Within 2 months, she had gone from a stranger hovering near the exit to a name people said with genuine warmth across the congregation. Her voice, once just a discovery Amara had stumbled on by accident, became something the whole church looked forward to on Sunday mornings. Where new converts often took years to find their footing, Grace found hers with a speed that startled even the older members, the kind of speed that people in ministry circles like to call anointing, because it's easier to explain a gift that way than to admit some people are simply built to bloom fast once they're planted somewhere safe. Amara watched all of it unfold with emotions so tangled she rarely paused to separate its threads. There was real, uncomplicated joy, the same joy she felt with Jude, with the crying girl on the stairwell years before her, with every soul she had ever poured herself into. But woven through that joy, so subtly she barely registered its presence, was something else. A quiet, private satisfaction that Grace's transformation was in some sense proof Proof that Amara still had it, whatever it was that made God trust her with people. Proof that her hands were still the kind of hands God used to build things. She told herself the pride was for God's glory. Most of the time, she nearly believed it. One Sunday afternoon, as members lingered after service in small clusters like they always did, Sister Esther approached Amara near the refreshment table. Sister Esther was older. One of the founding members who sat under the mango tree back in the ministry was 40 plastic chairs and a stuttering generator, and she had a way of watching people that missed very little. "That girl you brought in," Sister Esther said, nodding towards Grace, who stood a few feet away laughing with a cluster of younger women. "She's doing well." "She is," Amara agreed, smiling with the honest warmth of a teacher watching a student surpass expectation. God is doing something with her. Sister Esther studied Amara for a moment longer than the comment required, her head tilting slightly, the way an older woman looks at someone who she suspects is carrying something they haven't named yet. "And how are you doing, Amara?" The question was simple. It should not have unsettled her, but something in the way Sister Esther asked it made Amara's smile falter for just a fraction of a second before she caught it and steadied it back into place. "I'm well," Amara said. "Busy, grateful." Sister Esther said exactly the way Tolu often did, the sound older women make when they've decided not to push further but haven't quite let go of what they noticed. She patted Amara's arm once, gently, and moved on to greet someone else. Amara stood there a moment longer than she meant to, turning the question over. She told herself Sister Esther was simply being kind, the way older women in the church always were, checking on the ones who gave the most and asked the least. She did not let herself consider, not seriously, that Sister Esther might have seen something Amara herself had not yet fully admitted to seeing, that somewhere in the last few months, without deciding to, Amara had started watching Daniel and Grace's easy friendliness towards each other with a vigilance that had nothing to do with discipleship. She pushed the thought aside, the way she'd learned to push everything uncomfortable in 8 years of service. There was work to do. There was always work to do. Work had a way of making feelings wait. If you've ever poured into someone only to feel a strange knot in your chest watching them shine, you already understand the exact discomfort sitting quietly under this scene. Tell me in the comments if you felt this before, because Amara is about to feel it 100 times worse.
The invitation came on a Thursday, delivered the way Daniel delivered most important things, briefly, almost in passing, as though its weight might announce itself too loudly if he lingered on it. He found her outside the church office, arms full of folders she was carrying to the archive room, and fell into step beside her. "Amara, can we talk? Just the two of us. Maybe Saturday evening after the leaders' prayer session?" "Of course," she said, keeping her voice light, though something in her chest had already begun to climb toward a hope she had not yet given herself permission to name out loud. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Daniel said, and there was something in the small, private smile that crossed his face before he turned to walk away. A smile Amara would play for the next 2 days, like a verse she was trying to interpret correctly. Amara did not sleep well that Thursday night, not out of anxiety, but of hope, so large it felt almost physically uncomfortable to hold. She called Tolu the next morning before either of them had even had coffee. "Tolu, he wants to talk. Saturday, just the two of us." "Talk about what?" Tolu, still half asleep, took a moment to catch up. "He said it's something he's been sitting on for a while." Amara's voice, usually so measured, so careful, cracked slightly with something she had not let herself sound like in years. Excitement. Unguarded, girlish excitement. "Tolu, I think this is it. I think after 8 years, this is finally it." There was a pause on the other end, Tolu weighing to temper the hope or let her friend have this moment. She chose, out of love, to let her have it. "Then I'll be praying for you," Tolu said softly, "whatever it is." Amara spent that Saturday the way a woman spends a day she believes will become the hinge her whole life turns on. She ironed a dress she rarely wore,
the deep green one Daniel had once complimented in passing months earlier, a compliment she had filed away and never forgotten. She prayed longer than usual that morning, not the desperate prayers of a woman uncertain of her standing, but the grateful prayers of someone who believes she is finally about to receive what she has faithfully waited for. Lord, she whispered, kneeling beside her bed like she had sat at 21, though the woman praying now carried 8 more years of labor in her bones. Thank you for not forgetting me. Thank you for seeing what I gave and preparing to give something back. She arrived at the church 20 minutes early. She sat in her car in the parking lot, watching the evening light soften over the compound she had helped build from a mango tree into a proper hall with a proper roof, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine it plainly. A ring, a date announced from the pulpit, the women who had joked about her and Daniel for years finally proven right, finally vindicated in their teasing, and Amara finally allowed to stop deflecting a truth she had spent 8 years pretending not to feel. She did not yet know that hope, when it is built on a misread sentence, collapses the same way a building does when the foundation was never actually there to begin with. All at once, and without warning. The office was quiet when she stepped inside, lit boily by a desk lamp against the coming dusk, and Daniel was already seated, a stack of papers pushed to one side and his hands folded in front of him, in the exact posture of a man who has rehearsed something and is still afraid it won't land the way he wants it. Sit, he said, and Amara did, smoothing her green dress beneath her, her pulse loud in her own ears that she wondered, briefly, if he could hear it too. Amara, he began, and then stopped, exhaled, started again. I've been praying about something for a while, and I wanted you to be the first person I told because honestly, I don't think I trust this decision without your blessing on it. Her blessing, the word landed on her like warm water. She nearly smiled before he'd even finished. I believe God is leading me towards grace, and I need your help. The room did not change. The lamp did not flicker. Nothing around Amara moved at all, and that stillness was, in its own way, the cruelest part, because everything inside her had just come apart completely, and the world outside her had the audacity to stay exactly the same. Help you, she repeated, and her voice, when it came, sounded distant to her own ears, like it belonged to someone standing several feet behind where she was actually sitting. You know her better than anyone, Daniel said, leaning forward now, oblivious, warmed by his own certainty, mistaking her stillness for careful listening rather than a woman holding herself together by main force. Amara, he tilted his head slightly, some faint uncertainty finally breaking through his excitement. Is something wrong? She had exactly 1 second to decide who she was going to be in this room, and she reached, out of 8 years of practiced discipline, for the version of herself that had always known how to give without checking the cost first. No, she said, and the smile she produced was, to anyone who did not know her the way Tolu did, completely convincing. No, nothing's wrong. I'm just surprised. I wasn't expecting that name. Is that a good surprise or a bad one? Daniel asked, half joking, fully unaware of the size of what he had just asked her to survive. A good one, Amara said, and made herself believe it as she said it, the way she had made herself believe smaller lies before. Grace has a beautiful heart, Daniel. She's grown so much. I'm happy to help however you need. Relief broke openly across his face, and he reached across the desk to squeeze her hand once, briefly, gratefully, the exact gesture he might have given any trusted friend, entirely without the weight Amara's own body had just assigned to it. Thank you, he said. I knew I could count on you. She sat with him another 20 minutes, discussing timelines and next steps with a composure that would have made anyone in that room proud of her professionalism, offering thoughtful, useful counsel about Grace's spiritual maturity and readiness, every word costing her more than Daniel would ever know to notice. When she finally left the office, she walked to her car with her shoulders straight and her chin level, greeting two members in the parking lot with a warm smile that gave away absolutely nothing. She did not fall apart until she was inside her car. Doors locked, engine off, alone in the dark.
The sound that came out of her then was not the sound of a disappointed friend. It was older than that, deeper. Something that had been building quietly under 8 years of faithful service and had finally found a crack wide enough to escape through. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands and bent forward over it, her forehead nearly touching her knuckles, her whole body shaking with the effort of grief she had been holding at bay for exactly 23 minutes since a sentence had rearranged the entire shape of her future in a lamplit office. She cried the way people cry when the tears are not really about the thing that triggered them, but about every small hope they've swallowed quietly over years, all of it arriving at once, unpaid and overdue. She did not drive home for nearly an hour. When she finally did, she moved through her apartment on autopilot, removing her shoes, hanging up the green dress she would never be able to look at the same way again, and sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed once. Tolu. How did it go? Amara stared at the message for a long time before she typed her reply, deleting it twice, rewriting it, finally settling on the version that cost her the least to send. Not what I thought. Talk tomorrow. She turned the phone face down and did not pick it up again that night. Somewhere around midnight, unable to sleep, unable to sit still with the size of what she was carrying, Amara knelt beside her bed like she had 1,000 times before, the same posture, the same worn carpet beneath her knees, but the woman praying there was no longer the same woman who had knelt in that exact spot as a hopeful 29-year-old 3 days earlier. She meant to pray the way she had always prayed, surrendered, asking only for God's will to be done. The words that actually came out of her surprised even her. She whispered, "Lord, she is not your will for him. Remove her." She stopped, startled by her own voice, by the shape of what she had just said out loud into the dark. It was not a prayer asking to see God's will more clearly. It was a prayer asking God to rearrange his will to match her own. She had crossed a line she had never once crossed in 8 years of ministry, and some small, honest part of her recognized it, even as the rest of her refused to take the words back. She knelt there a long while after that, saying nothing more, simply breathing, simply existing inside the wreckage of a hope she had built with her own 2 hands out of 8 years of careful, quiet interpretation. Outside her window, the city carried on the way it always did, indifferent to the particular grief unfolding in one small room. Somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. In the days that followed, Amara did exactly what she had promised Daniel she would do. She sat with Grace over tea and asked her gentle, probing questions about her intentions, her readiness, her heart toward marriage and ministry, playing the role of wise counselor with a skill that would have fooled anyone who did not know what that role was now costing her. She smiled through it. She encouraged it. She told Grace with what sounded like complete sincerity that she believed Grace had grown into someone capable of standing beside a man like Daniel. All of it was, on the surface, exactly what love does. Underneath it, in a place Amara had not yet learned to examine honestly, something colder had begun keeping watch, waiting, praying its own private prayers in the dark, prayers that no longer asked only what God wanted, but had quietly begun asking for what Amara wanted to, dressed carefully in the language of discernment so that even she could not always tell the difference anymore. She did not know yet how far that quiet, private bitterness would carry her before she was finally forced to look directly at what she had become. She only knew that for the first time since she was 21 years old, kneeling beside a small bed and asking God only to let her chase what was real, her prayers had stopped being entirely about him. Some seeds are planted in soil. Others are planted in silence, in the space between what we say out loud and what we actually mean when we close our eyes to pray. Amara planted hers that night, and she would spend the next season of her life pretending she hadn't. If you saw this coming, tell me exactly where you noticed the shift. And if you've ever caught yourself praying more for your own will than God's, be honest with me in the comments. You are not the only one. Type grace below if you want part 3 next. Like this video if it moved you, subscribe if you're new here, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story today. I'll see you in the next one.